Good morning and welcome to the 17th Annual Market Outlook hosted by Bender Commercial Real Estate Services. I'm Michael Bender, one of the partners at Bender Commercial. And on behalf of my 5 other partners, all of whom you're going to hear from today, we want to thank you for being here this morning. We hope the information that we provide every year is helpful and useful for your business decisions in the coming year. It's a really cold morning, and we've got a great crowd, and we're really excited that you're all here. And we're certain that you're here to hear us, that no one else that you want to hear that's in the audience maybe later on. So sorry, Governor, but we're confident you want to hear us. So that does give me an opportunity, though, to welcome a couple of folks that are here. First, if you'll help me welcome Secretary Pat Costello. Pat, thank you for being here. As you know, Pat is a longtime resident of Sioux Falls, a lifetime resident of Sioux Falls, and has served our community in a number of ways. First, with his own business, he served our community over the years. And secondly, he decided to run for city council, and he served our community in public service that way. And now he is serving our state in public service. And so, Pat, I do really appreciate your service to our state. Thank you very much. Also want to just welcome Governor Daugaard and thank him for being here. I will formally introduce him later in the program. A couple of housekeeping issues that I'd like to go over. If you would, please just silence your cell phones. I won't mind it if it goes off, but maybe someone else in the room would get a little uppity about it going off during his speech. I don't know. So silence your cell phones. And then the other thing that I do want to do is remind you of something and maybe apologize on the front end before our presentation. We are going to go through this information very fast. In fact, faster and more rapid than we normally do. So if you've been here before, you know we go through it pretty rapid fire. But in an effort to save some time, both for the governor and possibly for some questions to the governor, we've decided to condense our presentation even shorter this year. So, with that in mind, if you'll remember, we have a jump drive that everyone is certainly welcome to grab, and you can certainly grab more than one if someone didn't make the presentation and you want to get one to them. We will have team members out in the hallway providing these for you, and this is the full and complete presentation with a lot more data, a lot more facts. So don't hesitate to grab one or two of these as you walk out. So. With that, let me go ahead and open up and start the presentation this morning. I like to start really in a very macro kind of a, come on in guys, there's plenty of room. There's seats down here. You don't need to stand the whole presentation. I like to start really very macro. And I like to start with the capital markets. The capital markets, as you know, are integral to commercial real estate. Our industry is very debt-laden, and so where the capital markets go, the real estate markets go as well. So we like to open up with the capital markets on a broad scope. So let's look at where we've been from a standpoint across the United States. Now, for 4 years, I've sat here and preached that we need to deleverage the capital markets. And to the tune of $1 trillion, you can see since 2009 to 2012, we've deleveraged the capital markets. That's a huge amount of debt that's been taken off of the commercial and multifamily market. Now that's been painful nonetheless, but it ultimately has been helpful for those properties. That means that owners have retired debt. That means that banks have had to take write-downs. A number of things have happened in order to deleverage. But that means going forward, it's a better, healthier market. Now what you're seeing in 2013 and hopefully in 2014 and beyond is you're starting to see the velocity of that money to start taking off again. So you're seeing a slight uptick in the debt, not much, but I do predict that coming in 2014, you're going to see that number grow by probably about $200 billion in the next year and the year after. So you're seeing better underwritten deals, more equity, and therefore lenders willing to give debt to those properties. So that's a good sign going into our market right here, but across the country. Let's look at where that debt is held, because I think it's important that you understand really who holds all that debt. You can see that the banks hold the majority of it, about 35%, or about $870 billion. In fact, they were up a little bit last year. The other major categories of the people that issue debt in the commercial and multifamily real estate are the life insurance companies, the agency debt, which is Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and that's predominantly on multifamily, and then basically the CMBS market, which I call Wall Street, and that's the commercial mortgage-backed securities. So those four categories issue most of the outstanding debt in our country on commercial and multifamily real estate. And you can see that's a big part of it right there. What I do want to show you, though, is the next slide, because I think we're not out of the woods just yet when it comes to outstanding debt and the maturities. What this slide does is indicate all of the debt outstanding across the country, and it breaks it down not only by maturity, but by who holds it. And what I want you to focus on is 2014 through 2017. And you can see that there's about $500 billion in outstanding debt that's going to come due and will need to be refinanced or paid off somehow in some way on all those properties. Now remember, that's the commercial mortgage-backed security market, that red band, and those loans were 10 years in duration. So what you're really seeing is debt that was placed pre-recession, 04, 05, 06, and 07. Now, I'm not suggesting that all that debt is underwater, but I am suggesting that a lot of it pre-recession is probably upside down. And certainly the underwriting wasn't as strong. A lot of that debt is interest only. There was never any mortgages paid and capital reduction paid or principal reduction. And clearly there was less equity put into those deals. So we're not quite out of the woods just yet on the debt side. Who will pick up the slack as we go forward? That remains to be seen, but I'll make some predictions towards the end of the presentation. Let's stay macro now and continue to drive ourselves down into the Sioux Falls economy. And we always like to start with jobs, because jobs drive both the permits and everything about our economy. And so let's look at what we did last year in Sioux Falls. We ended the year with about 3,100 new jobs, about a 2% job growth. Now that wasn't quite as strong as the year before, where we had 4,200 new jobs, but nonetheless, 3,100 new jobs, 3,200, somewhere in that range last year was extremely strong for our economy. Let's look at it in terms of percentages, because I think this tells a better picture as to what really is going on. And this year, we added the South Dakota economy, as you can see. Normally, we like to compare ourselves to the U.S. economy because we always look so much better than the U.S. economy. But you can see we've leveled off a little bit. I mentioned that record year in 2012 of 4,200 new jobs. You can see that spike. But this year, we added the red bar, which is the South Dakota economy for job growth. Now, I'm sorry to tell you, and sorry, Governor, to tell you that the U.S. economy last year outpaced the South Dakota economy. The U.S. economy grew by 1.6%. The South Dakota economy grew jobs by 1.4%. So on the surface, that doesn't look very good. We grew by 2% in the Sioux Falls economy. But that doesn't really tell the whole story, so let's dig a little deeper. And let's look at a 10-year horizon of job growth, because I think it's not fair to just look at 1 year, year over year. You've got to look at a longer term in your job growth. And this is the Sioux Falls economy. We grew about 1.8% over that 10-year period. That is the envy of any community in the United States. Now remember, this includes 08, 09, and 010, where we had negative job growth in some cases. So this is the envy of anywhere, I can promise you. The South Dakota economy grew at about 1.06% over that same 10-year period. And look at the U.S. economy, 0.5%. So what that says is, in essence, Sioux Falls is growing jobs and their economy at a 3-to-1 ratio to the U.S. economy. And South Dakota is growing at about a 2-to-1, a little bit over 2-to-1 ratio to the U.S. economy. Now, that doesn't happen by chance. That happens because we have leaders both at the local level and, more importantly, at the state level that are protective of our economy. They keep regulations down, they attempt to keep taxes down, and they attempt to foster a community that we all in this room can continue to grow our businesses. And with that, I just want to recognize and acknowledge that we have great leadership both at the local and the state level, and that's why you see those two categories just outpacing the U.S. economy. Look for, obviously, 2014, 2015. Look for that continued growth and outpacing the U.S. economy. Well, let's shift now from jobs to building permits and construction activity. And jobs just drive that number. Now, this is a number everybody's seen, $588 million last year in our economy right here in Sioux Falls that we grew. That's not a surprise because our mayor has mentioned that more than once in the last 60 days. Now, what I will tell you, we put the running average there, 420 million. That's about a 10-year average, 9-year average, I guess it is. And we're well ahead of that again this year. What I really want you to focus on, though, is the relationship between residential and commercial. Now, that's the significant thing in last year's numbers. It was roughly 50-50. And that's significant because historically, when we have those record years of total construction, the commercial outpaces the residential. In some cases, 60-40. Even one year, it was about a third, two-thirds. And that's simply math. Commercial projects are bigger, and therefore you get a little more construction numbers out of those projects. But this last year, 2013, it was 50-50. If you'll recall, we had a record year for residential construction. Will we continue that in 2014 and beyond? You'll hear from Rob on the land market. I believe you're going to see a little bit of slowdown on that, but you'll hear more about it from Rob as we go forward. So that's, to me, the significant story about that slide. Now let's look at really a comparison. We love to compare ourselves to others. That's just human nature. And so we love to compare our community to other communities as well. So what we did this year is a little different. We did it on a per capita basis. So this is the Sioux Falls city limits and our total construction versus other communities in our region. And I know we have a former city council member from Rapid City here in the audience, a friend of ours, and he'll be proud to know that for the second year in a row, Rapid City's had almost $250 million in construction, and on a per capita basis, that's phenomenal for that community. So there's a lot of good, positive things going on out in Rapid City as well. The one that was kind of an outlier was Des Moines. It looks like, geez, there's nothing going on in Des Moines. What's the deal in Des Moines? And when you dig deeper into the numbers, what you really find is most of the activity in Des Moines is outside the city limits in West Des Moines, Ankeny, and some of those areas, and so that doesn't fall into the city limit number of Des Moines. But nonetheless, Sioux Falls, again, outpaces all those other communities. Look for 2014 and beyond for that to continue to happen. I'll make some predictions for construction here in a sec. Well, let's drive deeper and deeper into these numbers. The city of Sioux Falls does a great job of presenting to us these numbers every year, and we appreciate their effort in the planning department. But they break down between addition, remodel, and new construction. Now, if you don't hear anything else about my presentation, I want you to focus on this slide, because this slide will tell you, and it's guaranteed, it will tell you whether you're an expanding economy or a contracting economy. When it's expanding, the blue line outpaces the red line. When it's contracting, the red line outpaces the blue line. I stood before you a year ago somewhat boldly and predicted that the blue line would widen the gap, that we would have far more new construction than addition remodel, and I was wrong. It actually closed a little bit. Actually, the blue line stayed fairly stable. It was the red line, or addition remodel, that jumped up and narrowed that gap more than I thought. I'll tell you the reasons why and give you some examples here soon, but the point is, going into 14 and certainly into 2015, you're going to see the new construction continue to outpace that addition remodel, and that's a great sign for our economy as we go forward. Let's dig a little deeper now into the numbers on the new construction. And this breaks down the four main categories of that new construction. You can see that the yellow pie chart, or the other category, just dominated this year. That's not been the case in years past. That yellow, in that definition by the city, is non-traditional projects such as the Sanford Pentagon, the Events Center. So what you're seeing is the tail end of that construction being a dominant force. Let's look at it a little differently, because again, I think a perspective of time gives us a better understanding of where we're going. You can see that yellow line has historically been low, under 20 million a year, and then all of a sudden it shot up dramatically the last 2 years. You'll see that come down dramatically as well in the next 2 years, in the next year for that matter. The one that I want to focus on a little bit and point out is that blue line, which is the office sector. Historically, that's been the kind of the rock star of construction here in Sioux Falls, driven predominantly by the medical community and the financial services. Well, you can see that's really tapered off. I don't expect that to jump up dramatically, but I do expect to see an uptick in that. You're going to hear more about that part of the presentation from Andy, one of my other partners. The other category that I want you to spend some attention on and focus on and think about over the course of the year when you hear more announcements is the green line. The retail category is up to about 40 million this year. You can see it's the highest it's been. In 2014 and beyond, you're going to see more and more retail construction in our community. We are constantly being looked at by national and regional retailers. So look for more retail construction going into this year and beyond. Well, some examples that I mentioned earlier, and this will give you an indication why that addition remodel has come so close to the new construction. You know, who would have thought that a Shields addition remodel really was more expensive than a Costco? You don't think of that, but that's the case, so that's the category. So it's all good signs as we go forward, whether it's addition remodel or new construction. Last year we had the snow monkeys at the zoo, and they got a $3 million home, so we don't have anything like that this year on the addition remodel, but they're living pretty good still, I think, over at the zoo. Well, let me wrap up my presentation with some predictions. The capital markets, clearly we're going to see an uptick this year, a slight uptick. We've already seen a little bit of it in the 5 and the 10-year Treasury on our interest rates. I do believe, though, they're not going to be that dramatic, because if the 5 and 10-year Treasury go up dramatically, I think there's lenders that are still going to want those very well underwritten credit deals, and they're going to lower their spread in order to keep those rates attractive to the developers. And I guess that's a hint to maybe some of my lenders that are in the audience to lower your spread a little bit in the coming year. Stronger underwriting, no question, and that's been the case the last 2 or 3 years. There's been much stronger underwriting of transactions, both at Sioux Falls, but even more so on a national level. Are we going to see some agency debt disappear? That's Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. I think there's no question that what you're going to see in 2014, and probably even more dramatic in 2015, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac loan predominantly on multifamily, under the idea that they're helping provide housing for our country. You're going to see less and less agency debt. Someone's going to have to pick up that slack because there'll be transactions. Will it be the life insurance companies? I think so. Could it be the commercial mortgage-backed securities? You saw how much they've got to deal with over the next few years. So someone needs to pick up that kind of that debt load. I think it'll be the life insurance companies as well as local banks. Clearly the local banks dominate, as you saw, commercial lending. So don't count out the local banks as well. Well, on the Sioux Falls economic outlook, we're going to see another strong year for job growth. The numbers already indicate in January and February, the preliminary numbers from the Bureau of Labor Statistics indicate a strong January already, even with this cold weather here in Sioux Falls. So look for about 2,800 to 3,000 jobs in our community. That's about 1.9 to 2% job growth for Sioux Falls. Not a record year by any stretch, but again, the envy of this upper Midwest. If we can grow our economy by 3,000 jobs a year, the hard part, as we know, and maybe we'll hear about that from our governor, and certainly we're hearing about that at a local level, is basically, workforce development. And we have the jobs. We just have to find the right people, the right qualified people for the right jobs. So that's going to be a big focus as we go into the next 2 years for our economy. Tapering of construction, I think we're going to see a slight tapering. I doubt it's going to be a record year, but it's certainly going to be a very strong year. There's a number of large commercial projects that I'm aware of. I do believe we're going to see a slowdown in the residential side. There was a credible pin-up demand last year for residential. I believe 1,000 to 1,100 new single-family permits were issued last year for residential. So you'll see a slight tapering. And then as I predicted earlier, retail, you'll see an uptick on the retail construction. So that just gives you a quick, fast, down and dirty overview of our economy. Now we're going to drive deeper into each one of those sectors, and I'm going to call Reggie Kuipers up to talk about retail.
Thank you, Michael. As Michael said, I'll be presenting on the retail sector today. For the purposes of our presentation today, I'm going to focus on tenant-occupied space only. We've taken away all owner-occupants and the Empire Mall. 2013 was a fantastic year for Sioux Falls. Large projects, national tenants, spec building, and more to come. Retail tends to focus in clusters, generally around an intersection. We call them retail focal points, and we're going to look at 5 of them today. They are the mall area, 57th and Louise, 57th and Western, 69th and Western, and on the east side of the Dolly Farm. Let's take a look at the first one around the mall. Ton of activity around the mall last year. The first question we get asked when a national tenant calls is there any space available by the mall? As you can see, there's about 600,000 square feet of tenant-occupied space. Unfortunately, for those tenants that are looking, there are only a few vacancies. Average asking rental rates here have a huge spread, $12 a square foot for that second-generation tuck-behind space, all the way up to $28 a square foot for that new construction. Last year, we predicted there'd be some redevelopment in this area, and there was. The old Sinclair gas station was purchased, raised, and now is the home of Panda Express, Mattress Firm, and the Vitamin Shop. Don't be surprised to see another 1 or 2 redevelopments in this area this year. Let's take a look at 57th and Louise. 57th and Louise is the premier neighborhood retail intersection in southwest Sioux Falls. It's a traditional intersection. It's got retail tenanted strip malls on all 4 corners. This is nearly the exact same slide we looked at last year, 150,000 square feet. At year end, we had 1 vacancy. When space is available here, it ranges from $16 to $21.50 a square foot. An interesting thing to watch will be with the construction of the new overpass bridge over 229, will some of that retail push west here? We think it will. Let's take a look at 57th and Western. This is a really unique intersection because all the development is on the south side of 57th Street. There's about 100,000 square feet of tenant space. This is mostly in the Bridges development. The Bridges development is made up of local specialty shops and boutiques, and because of that, there is some turnover. But with reasonable asking rates from $15 to $17 a square foot, the space backfills quickly. Just like last year, at year end, 0% vacancy. So what do you do when your building is full for 2 consecutive years and you've got tenants knocking on your door? You move a mile south and you build more retail, which is what happened last year. 69th and Western is a emerging neighborhood retail intersection, 54,000 square feet of tenant space. 32,000 of that was built as a spec development last year. With reasonable asking rates from $14 to $15 a square foot and a generous tenant improvement package, the space filled very quickly. At year end, we had 2 vacancies in this entire intersection, totaling 8.3%. You're going to see more new construction in this intersection this year. Let's head out to the east side of Dolly Farm. Again, for the purposes of my presentation today, we are focusing on tenant space only. Dolly Farm has about 130,000 square feet of tenant space. At year end, a whopping 21% vacancy, and we'll come back to that in a second. Average asking rental rates out here from $14 to $22 a square foot. Back to that vacancy, 21% is a little misleading. 21% is about 28,000 square feet. Some of that is already being absorbed this year, and about 10,000 of that lies north of Arrowhead Parkway and has been difficult to lease for years. We saw a lot of activity out here this past year, and you're going to see several more major announcements in 2014. Some major notable retailers, Beef O'Brady's, Dick's, Mattress Firm, all entered our market and were new to Sioux Falls, among several others. Some conclusions for the retail market. Well, vacancies down and rental rates are up. When that happens, you see new construction. We experienced that last year, and we're going to see more of that in 2014 on all four corners of the city. Sioux Falls continues to be a vibrant regional hub, attracting local, regional, and national tenants. An interesting note, 7 new hotels broke ground or opened for business in 2013, and more are planned for 2014. I would look for that trend to start to slow over the next 12 to 24 months. Some predictions. As we mentioned earlier, there's probably going to be some redevelopment this year. It will occur either along Minnesota Avenue or 41st Street. East Side momentum, you're going to see a lot of announcements out there this year. As Michael alluded to earlier, we might have a banner year in retail construction this year. Last year, we predicted a third Walmart. That's under construction right now. This year, it'll be interesting to see what happens at 85th and Minnesota with a proposed fourth Walmart. So where are we at in the real estate cycle? This is a traditional real estate cycle moving from left to right. We have recovery, expansion, hypersupply, and recession. The indicators in the retail sector this year were rental rate and job growth, decrease in vacancy, and high new construction. With that, we clearly entered expansion into 2013. I'd now like to bring up Andy Anderson to present on the office market. Thank you.
Thank you, Reggie. You can tell the men in my life picked out the chairs that we have to sit on up there, so excuse me. I'm here to talk about the office market today. And fortunately, we've seen a good, strong year in the office market, so let's get started. We have about 13.5 million square feet in the Sioux Falls office market. Now, as you can see, half of that is owner-occupied, half of that is tenant-occupied. As we move forward, I only focus on the 6.8 million square feet of tenant-occupied space, due to the fact that the owner-occupied doesn't affect vacancy or rental rates. We have 2 sectors in the office market. The CBD, or the Central Business District, is the first sector. And as you can see, we did see an increase in the inventory by 0.2% from the previous year, currently putting us at 2.3 million square feet. Now, as we see Uptown expand and the potential of Sharapa 2 getting constructed, this will only continue to go up. And we had positive net absorption in this sector of over 100,000 square feet. That's a 4.8% increase from the previous year. And as you can see, the CBD has certainly rebounded from the negative net absorption we saw in 2009. What happens when you have positive net absorption? Your vacancy rate drops, and it did. We're currently sitting at 8.7%. Last year, I mentioned the Western Surety Building to kind of watch and see what happens. This year, the building to watch is the DM&E building. It'll be really interesting to see what kind of transition takes place on this site. Now let's move on to the suburban sector, which is everything excluding the downtown office market. And our inventory did increase in this sector as well by 0.8%, putting it at 4.5 million square feet. And we had positive net absorption of over 90,000 square feet, which is really good news. You can see that is a drop from the previous year, but remember our supply was down in the suburban sector as well, so that's one of the reasons. And again, positive net absorption leads to a decline in vacancy rates, and we're currently sitting at the lowest we've seen in years, 8.1%. Now we're going to shift gears and look at things as a whole. This slide represents our citywide vacancy rates. And as you can see, the Sioux Falls vacancy rate has been consistently dropping. Now this is in contrast to the national vacancy rate, which is creeping up. What's happening in the national office markets is we're seeing office densification taking place, meaning businesses are putting more bodies into less square footage. Now we're seeing that happen in Sioux Falls as well, just not quite as dramatically. The national vacancy rate is sitting at 17%, and Sioux Falls is at 8%. And when the office market tightens, the result of that is rental rates do increase, and we're seeing that happen in Class A office space as well as Class B and C. And fortunately, we had positive net absorption citywide of about 200,000 square feet. Now, once again, that is a drop from the previous year, but take a look at the red bar, which represents our supply. That is down as well. Let's jump back to 2005 through 2007. You can see demand was so high. It's no wonder we saw so much speculative building taking place. Then '08 through '11 hit, and we're still recovering from that. But fortunately, that relationship between supply and demand is certainly getting healthier. Now, some predictions for 2014. With demand still being down, I expect we'll see limited inventory growth taking place. But fortunately, all the fundamentals in the office market are moving in the right direction. Our vacancy is down, we've seen continued positive net absorption, and rental rates are starting to creep up, which is great news. Now, does that mean we'll see spec building taking place? I only think we'll see that happen if developers have a tenant in tow or a potential of 50% of that building pre-leased. And as a result, I think that puts us right on the line between recovery and expansion in the office market. We're just not quite ready to move into expansion yet. And with that, I'd like to bring up Nick.
Thank you, Andy. In this portion of our presentation, we focus on sales, and this includes owner-occupied and investment property. For purposes of brevity, we'll focus on multifamily, office, and retail. We'll take a look at sales volume, prices per square foot, and cap rates. We'll take a look at what happened in Sioux Falls in 2013, and we'll make some predictions about 2014. In the 1989 film, Field of Dreams, Kevin Costner's character heard a voice from the heavens saying, "Build it, and they will come." Well, clearly, Sioux Falls multifamily developers heard this same voice because they built a whopping 1,300 new multifamily and townhouse units. Now, there's a lot of smart money in this room, and you guys are probably thinking, wow, with this much addition to the supply, vacancy rates had to have spiked. Well, the smart money in here would be wrong. Vacancy rates actually remain stable and tick downwards just a bit. Clearly, Sioux Falls population and job growth absorb these new units with ease. Now, with these strong fundamentals, the smart money again may venture and say, hey, you guys must have had a great year in Sioux Falls in terms of sales. The smart money would be wrong again. We only sold 25 buildings, 4 units and higher, and frankly, this is because it's hard to find 1031 property investment transactions. People are enjoying record cash flows, and quite frankly, they're having fun. Let's take a look at some notable transactions. The Viking Apartments, this is a late 70s era project, sold at a 6.8% cap rate or $2.3 million. Clearly, investors are willing to get aggressive in today's low vacancy, low cap rate environment. You heard from Andy that office leasing was very healthy. Well, clearly, this was also reflected in our office sales. Sioux Falls sold over $50 million worth of office buildings last year, and this comes after 5 years of very anemic sales. Let's take a look at some of these transactions. 2 buildings sold in the office, Crossing Place Office Park, $2.5 million, and note this 7.6% cap rate. Next up, we had a true Class A development change hands last year at a whopping $14.25 million. This is a 7.7% cap rate. This is a nice project, underground parking and quality finishes. You heard from Reggie that retail was very healthy in terms of leasing last year, and frankly, this was also not reflected in retail sales transactions in Sioux Falls. We simply were missing some of the larger transactions that we typically see on any given year. However, we do have a poster child in retail sales. Reggie mentioned this. The Sinclair gas station right outside the Empire Mall sold to a developer for roughly $30 a square foot to the dirt. The developer built a 10,000 square foot building, filled it with national tenants at high rental rates, and then turned around and it's under contract to an investor for $4.65 million. Clearly a big win. In 2013, multifamily and retail sales were down while office was up big. When I take a look at activity we're already having in 2014, I can predict with confidence that multifamily and retail are going to have big years. Office will as well. However, it's going to be tough to beat $50 million worth of sales transactions. When I take a look at cap rates, I project between 6.5% to 8% in multifamily, 7 to 8.5% in office, and between 7 and 8% in retail. Let's take a look at the real estate cycle. In regards to all three asset classes I covered in sales, all three classes are firmly in expansion. With that, I'd like to bring up Rob to discuss the land market.
Thanks, Nick. Well, a year ago, I stood before you and said that we were finally starting to see some light at the end of the tunnel by the end of 2012. Well, for 2013, that light was shining bright. So today, I'm going to be focusing on the unimproved land market and why it's so ripe for sales right now, along with the improved land market and why we're seeing pre-recession activity. But to start out, I first want to define what I mean by the land market. By our definition, the land market consists of 5 different property types. It all starts out as unimproved land, which is generally the farm ground that surrounds the city and is sold on a per acre basis. Now, when you start plugging in all the different utilities such as curb, gutter, sewer, water, etc., it becomes improved ground, and that land is used for the 4 other basic property types. These are sold on a per square foot basis. To start out, let's take a look at the unimproved land market. As you can see, back in 2008, moving our way to 2013, there's been a gradual increase in the amount of unimproved land sales, topping out at 7 in 2013. Of those 7 sales, 5 of them were for residential developments on the south end of town. They ranged from $13,000 an acre all the way up to $42,000 an acre. There was a 6th sale that was a mixed-use development that sold for $18,000 an acre, and then a 7th sale at $51,000 an acre, which will be used for a future Harrisburg school. Now, it's important to note that all of the 2012 and 2013 transactions all occurred on the south end of town. Everybody wants to be located down there for some reason. So expect this southward trend to continue throughout the remainder of the year. Now, to properly gauge the health of this market, we have to take a look at one of its major driving forces, the residential market, and its availability of build-ready lots. What do I mean by build-ready? Make it simple. Buy a lot tomorrow, build on it the very next day. That red bar, which is our build-ready lots, represents our supply, which is sitting at right around 2,800 lots. Now, when you compare that to our demand, the number of residential building permits that were issued this past year, just over 1,000, we're sitting on just under a 3-year supply. So expect that red bar to start to increase moving through the rest of this year. Let's switch gears and take a look at that per square foot stuff. The number of improved land transactions increased by 50% this past year, from 36 in 12 to 54 in 2013. And that made up a dollar amount of right around $37 million worth of sales. Now, even though the transactions increased by 50%, the total sales volume more than doubled. Why is this? Well, a lot of it has to do with those crazy retailers out there buying up a number of retail sites. So let's break these down into their individual land use. As you can see, for a number of years, the industrial land market, that red bar, led the way. But as you just heard me say, the retail market has really picked up, and you can see that with that green bar right there. From 2010 to 2013, we've seen a drastic increase in the amount of retail land transactions. And you heard Reggie and Michael talk about all the construction that's going on in the retail sector and will continue on this year. That will create a tapering of the number of transactions as construction catches up. Let's break this down into pricing. As far as office and retail, this is truly the largest gap when it comes to pricing. It's because it's more location sensitive than that in the industrial and multifamily markets. There is one interesting trend that I would like to highlight that occurred this past year. and is an exception to that grid, and that was the addition of infill sites. Infill sites are those sites where the land is more valuable than the structure itself, and owner-occupants or investors will go out and redevelop these sites and pay a premium for it, ranging between $20 and $30 a square foot. Some examples include, and you heard Nick and Reggie highlight it, Nick said it was the poster child of kind of our presentation this year, but was the old Sinclair gas station out in front of the Empire Strip Mall, or out in front of the Empire Mall. The second was the old China Star restaurant, which was bulldozed. Montgomery's Furniture is adding on to their building. And then the third was up on North Minnesota and Russell, and Come and Go purchased that site and will be and already demoed a portion of it, and will be building a convenience store on that property. With that, let's jump into my conclusions and predictions. As for unimproved land with that limited supply of build-ready lots, expect some developers to step out this year and tie up another 6 to 8 land tracts. We're already aware of a few that are under contract today. As far as improved land sales, 2013 was an acquisition year. 2014 will be a build year. So expect the number of improved land transactions to remain right around 50 or so throughout the remainder of the year. And then as far as pricing, the price per square foot and the price per acre that people are paying is slowly starting to climb back up. And expect that trend to continue throughout the remainder of 2014. Now, I'm kind of the black sheep of the presentation. I don't have my real estate cycle like everybody else, so I'm going to bring up Mr. Doug Brockhouse to present on the industrial market.
Well, thank you, Rob. I get to bat cleanup today, and I always enjoy being in this position. Now, some of you might have noticed this teleprompter thing down here in front. We're not supposed to look at it. It's kind of like the booze that's in the refrigerator in the motel room. If you drink it, you get charged for it. If we look at this thing, we get charged for it. So if you notice my eyes starting to drift down, or remind me, or if you see me going like this, we're going to get charged. So anyway, with that, I get to speak on the industrial market today. I always like to start out my presentation by describing what we mean by the industrial market. Industrial market is made up of those properties used for warehouse and manufacturing, transportation, distribution, contractor shops, and the like. A lot of those metal buildings that sit up in the north part of the city, but it includes the other ones also. Sioux Falls growth remained constant this past year, and the 759 number you see there represents a growth, as I just said. About 19 additional properties were added into the market. That added 500,000 square feet of space to our market study. T, on the other hand, appeared to remain pretty much constant, with the exception that Deeg East Manufacturing built their new manufacturing facility just on the south side of the T airport. Now, in contrast to what Reggie and Andy said, they don't include the owner-occupied and tenant-occupied, non-occupied space in the reports. I include it all. And in the industrial market, the split between owner-occupied and non-owner-occupied last year saw a 0.4% change. And by the end of the year, it virtually stood at a 70-30 split. Now, contrast that to 10 years ago, the owner-occupied had about an 80% foothold in the industrial market. Let's take an in-depth look at the dynamics that are going on within the industrial market. At the beginning of last year, we were sitting on 600,000 square feet of vacant space, and the market was absorbing space at about 2,000 square feet per day. We had 290 days supply sitting there. Okay, Michael reported just minutes ago that there was $23 million in construction permit dollars spent in the industrial market. Those construction permit dollars resulted in 13 newly constructed industrial buildings and the addition remodel on 2 buildings also. All of that combined to add about 315,000 square feet of additional space to the industrial market. Now, this is a new graph I added this year, and it shows you what type of properties those dollars are spent on. as you see, for the most part, storage and warehouse led the way. And I'm going to come back to that in my conclusion. But storage and warehousing led the way, but I do want to point out the yellow sector. There was one manufacturing property built in 2013. Notice I'm looking down now, so we're getting the meters running, getting charged. Okay, a couple examples of newly constructed properties this past year. I call this my priority slide. The first property, that's a 40,000-foot facility up in the northern part of the city. It's a place where they process and grind flaxseed. And the bottom one, that's a newly constructed 95,000 square foot beer distribution warehouse. You might notice that the beer distribution warehouse is more than twice as big as that flax place up north. Might have something to say about our priorities in this city. Okay? Year after year, I keep reporting that we have a sub 4.5% vacancy in the industrial market. With such a small amount of vacancy for companies to consider, when new companies want to come into our market, or when companies that are here want to expand, they are forced to take a look at existing space that is currently occupied. And when that happens, we classify that as turnover existing space. Last year, 2013, we saw a whopping 700,000 square feet of turnover of existing space. Now, when you add the components that make up available space, vacancy at the beginning of the year, that newly constructed stuff that we talked about, and turnover existing space, you can see that in 2013 we had 1.6 million square feet of available space. Now here's one of my take-home slides from my presentation. Our research showed that on January 1 of 2014, vacancy had dropped clear down to 536,000 square feet. That equates to 3.5% vacancy in the industrial market. Once again, we've dropped below the 4% bar in the industrial vacancy. Okay, simple math. If we had 1.6 million square feet available, at the end of the year we're sitting on 536,000 square feet vacant. That means we consumed or absorbed over 1 million square feet of space. 1 million square feet. Now let's keep it simple. Absorption was way up in 2013. When you absorb 1 million square feet in just 365 days, that means your rate of absorption is over 3,000 square feet per day. At that rate of absorption, we will, and no other space comes available within our market. That means that we will burn through that 536,000 feet of vacant space by August 1 of this year. Let's take a look at a couple of examples of sales and leases that contributed to those net absorption numbers. Here's an example of turnover existing space. Building Products made a great buy when they purchased the former Geldwin building up on East 54th Street North. Just $33.25 a foot for a fairly new building with a lot of amenities in it. Springer Midwest, they purchased the former Blue Links building up in Development Park number 1, and we had Grand Prairie Foods purchasing the Variety Foods building in the old Airport Industrial Park. In summary, of industrial sales, we saw 29 sales last year that ranged from $11 a square foot clear up to $80 a square foot, with an average somewhere around $38 or $40 a square foot. And I know some of you are wondering, where can you buy a building for $11 a square foot? If you got gray hair and you've been around Sioux Falls for a number of years, that building was the old Terrace Park Dairy building over on 9th and West, recently known as the Vault. A couple examples of leases that we saw last year. Dakota Fluid Power leased the RSC rental building. They paid $550 a foot, and Hill-Rom moved into a new building that was built specifically for them at $450 a foot. Now, those two rents were in the upper end of what we saw last year. Our research showed that rental rates were up about 25 cents a foot last year to an average around $4.40 a foot. Even though those rental rates are on the rise, the increase in construction costs far outpaced that rise in rents. And contractors and developers are still finding it nearly impossible to make the numbers work and go out and build spec. So my conclusion and predictions, that whole turnover of existing space, we were surprised by a 700,000 number there. Our prediction for 2014, that number, it'll continue, but that number will drop down to about 500,000 feet. Contractors and developers are back to the basics. They will build if they have a tenant in tow, but they're going to remain more than hesitant to go out and build spec until the numbers correct themselves. And that increase in storage and warehouse, I think that increase will continue as e-commerce continues, and the need for same-day or next-day delivery, I think we're going to see that, we're going to see a little more storage going on in the Sioux Falls area. And as I pointed out, that yellow bar, there was one manufacturing facility built in Sioux Falls. I think we'll see a little bit more of that going on around the city as opposed to being right in the city. And so here's this real estate cycle. As we leave 2014 and move into 2015, or 2013 into 2014, okay, 25 cents a foot in rental rate increases, I guess you could call that recovery. And 13 new buildings, I guess you could call that expansion. So when you take a look, I say, yeah, we're around this green box right here. But all in all, it still doesn't feel that good in the industrial market, but it's not bad. Thank you. Hey, Michael, by the way, I think that's about enough Bender speak at this point. Would you step over here and introduce the governor? Sure. Thank you.
Well, that wraps up our very brief presentation, and I do thank you for being here. It's now my honor and my pleasure to introduce our next speaker. Dennis Daugaard is South Dakota's 32nd governor. He's a family man, a steward, and a champion of our state. Dennis grew up on his family's dairy farm between Garrettson and Del Rapids. He and his wife Linda and their 3 children are the 4th generation to live on that farm. As governor of South Dakota, Dennis is our state's leading steward of its assets, its resources, working for the advancement and betterment and quality of life for all the people of South Dakota. Dennis is our biggest champion, helping sell the benefits of living in and doing business in South Dakota. Whether it's traveling to California to talk to the dairy industry or talking just to our neighbors to the east about the benefits of South Dakota's business advantages. We're fortunate to have him joining us here today, and please join me in welcoming Governor Dennis Daugaard.
Thank you. Well, the good news is, bad news is I don't have any slides, and I have a number of sheets here, but it's a limited number. So that's the good news, I guess. Thank you, Mike, and thank you to everyone at Bender Commercial for inviting me to visit with you all today. You know, we're, Pat Costello and his team at Economic Development are very grateful to commercial and industrial realtors because they are really our front line in meeting folks who are interested in business expansion and growth in our South Dakota markets. And whether it's Bender Commercial or Dennis Bresky or Craig Lloyd or Craig Rickard or Jim Dunham, we all are very lucky when those folks call us because it means that someone is interested in South Dakota. And so thank you for what you and your team do here and to all of those in your business. Things are looking good in South Dakota, and I think some of what you've seen today reflects that. Of course, Sioux Falls is the dynamic engine that drives a lot of the economic strength of our state, and so thank you all in the audience for what you're doing. With the legislature in session and the budget to be adopted and lots of issues in play, things are pretty busy for me these days. In fact, they're long days, and so sometimes you really don't get a chance to connect with the people you need to connect with. Just the other day, I know some of you heard the story, I was at it all day long, got home late, finally had a chance to sit down with Linda, and she'd been traveling, and before that I'd been traveling, and we really hadn't had much conversation, so we finally said, well, let's just sit down and talk and catch up. And we were sitting there and relaxing and having a glass of wine, and Linda looked down and she said, "I love you." And I said, "Wow, was that you talking or is that the wine talking?" She said, "No, it's me talking to the wine." So I'm hoping you have a little bit more interest in what I have to say than Linda did that day. But seriously, Linda's here in town with me. We're glad to come to be part of this because it dovetails very nicely with our granddaughter Stella turns 1 tomorrow. So we got a little birthday party on Sunday. And so we're glad to be back in our home neck of the woods to spend time with family. In 2013, South Dakota was recognized by a number of outside observers. Of course, Mike mentioned that I'm trying to be South Dakota's #1 salesman, but people look at what I say about South Dakota with some askance because they know it's my job to pitch South Dakota. And I'm very proud to do it, but it's also helpful when objective outsiders confirm some of the good things that I say about South Dakota. Last April, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce named South Dakota's business climate as best in the nation. Then in June, the U.S. Department of Commerce released its study of regional prices, and you can check this for yourself. Just go on your internet search engine and type in regional price parity, and you'll come across the study that they released that compares all 50 states, one to another, to the average cost of living in the United States. And you can guess the most expensive places to live are places like Hawaii and New York and New Jersey and Washington, D.C. But if you go down that list all the way to the bottom, 87% of the average U.S. cost is what you pay to live in South Dakota. Our cost of living is the lowest cost of living in the nation. Then in July, CNBC announced live at Mount Rushmore with the television cameras rolling that South Dakota was #1 for business. They do an annual study, and South Dakota scored the highest in their history of their study. And so that was something that made us feel very proud. These distinctions are great, and they all boil down to one thing. South Dakota is a great place to do business. And I'll recite some other demarcations of that. Our unemployment rate fell again in late 2013 to 3.6%. It's the second lowest in the nation, behind only North Dakota, of course, whose oil boom drives their unemployment rate down. Our rate is especially gratifying when you consider that 8 states are still at 8% or worse unemployment, including Rhode Island, which is at 9.1% unemployment. And then you also have to recognize that metropolitan areas like Sioux Falls are even lower than that 3.6%, but there are also metropolitan areas in other parts of the country which are extremely bad. We've got metropolitan areas in California, in Arizona, in Illinois, in New Jersey that are 12% unemployment or worse, and there are a couple of metropolitan areas, one in Arizona and one in California, that have more than 20% unemployment rate. So Sioux Falls and South Dakota have a lot to be thankful for. Another thing I like to point out that I think gives business people confidence in assuming the risks that they must assume, that is the competition risks they may face from their competitors, the economic risks they may face from macroeconomic factors. But one risk they don't want to have to face is the risk that their governments will not provide a stable business environment, and that the activities or inactivities of their governments will cause instability and uncertainty in the markets. And so at the state level, I want to reassure you that our state finances are in order. You know, when I was first elected, our budget was in deficit, as you know, and not because of mismanagement, but because of the recession, and you saw that recessionary impact on some of the real estate numbers. But looking for guidance on how to balance the budget, I climbed to the top of the mountain to get enough to talk to God. And in looking up, I asked the Lord, God, in the vastness of time, what is $1 million to you? And the Lord replied, it is but a minute. And I asked, and what is $1 million to you? And the Lord replied, but a penny. And I asked, can I have a penny? And the Lord answered, in a minute. Not being able to rely upon quick action there, we balanced our budget in 2011 and reported a modest surplus at the end of fiscal year 2012. We reported another surplus at the end of fiscal year 13. And we've balanced our budget honestly in South Dakota. We look at what our ongoing expenses are, and we bring them to the level of ongoing revenue. We don't use one-time revenue sources to spend on ongoing expenses that we know are going to recur next year when those one-time resources, by definition, would not be there again. And many states don't do that. Many states take one-time revenue from the sale of a capital asset or an unusual tax occurrence, and they'll take that one-time revenue and apply it to ongoing expenses, and they'll build that base of expenses still higher and create expectations that can't be met the following year, and then they'll use other desperate means. They'll push expenses into the next year. Minnesota has done that. You take your payrolls. If you pay your employees twice a month, you've got 24 payrolls. You get to the last payroll at the end of the year. Well, let's just send that check out the day after the end of the year. And suddenly your expenses on a cash basis, and that's the way state budgets report when they're talking about we balanced our budget, they're reporting on a cash basis. And it looks like they are balanced when in fact they're not. We are now 8 months into fiscal year 2014, which ends June 30th. Our fiscal year runs July 1 to June 30th. And many of you know from newspaper or other accounts that we're receiving this year, we already have this year received an extraordinary amount of unclaimed property. And again, many of you will know from what you've read that unclaimed property is property that's in the hands of banks or other financial institutions whose owner cannot be found any longer. Someone's created a savings account or overpaid their credit card or for some reason has a credit balance on the books of a financial institution, and then they move away or they die and their heirs are unaware of the account. And the financial institution looks for that owner, and they'll look and look and look. And in South Dakota, they would look and look 2 more times. 5 years in South Dakota, financial institutions would look for that owner. And then at the end of 5 years, our law provided that those assets would be turned over to the state. And the state continues to look. You know, I know you've all seen the treasurer's list at the state fair or the treasurer's advertisements in the paper, all the lists of names. I've searched desperately for my name in that list. Maybe you've looked, and some of those owners are reunited with their assets, but most of the time they are not. And so those assets become available for expenditure. Well, when I came into office, we realized that our neighboring states had 3-year periods. Their states would look and look and look, and then turn the asset over to the state. South Dakota had a 5-year holding period for those financial institutions. So we changed the law, and this year, the effect of that law was for financial institutions to turn over 5-year-old property, 3-year or 4-year-old property, and 3-year-old property. Now next year, of course, we'll receive just 3-year-old property, and thereafter 3-year-old property. So I tell you that because as a consequence of that law change, we received a one-time infusion of revenue that will not recur. So again, some states build something with that, and that's a responsible use of that money. Some states, unfortunately, use those one-time infusions of revenue to pay those folks in education and Medicaid who expect ongoing support, and when that support jumps, then that's the new base from which you must jump further in future years. My proposal in the budget was to take a good share, in fact, the lion's share of that money, and pay down debt. South Dakota has very little debt. In fact, Barron's in 2012 named us one of the best managed, well, in fact, they named us the best managed state in the nation, in part because of our very low debt. Still, we do have about $320 million of debt that's held by one of our authorities, the building authority or one of the other authorities, and the payments of that debt are supported by general fund obligations, are part of the state budget. Most of our authority debt is revenue bonds, where you build a dorm at SDSU, and the students who pay their dorm rent fees, they cover the cost of the bonds. They're revenue bonds. But we have several bonds that are not like that, and or more than several. We have $320 million of bonds like that. I'm proposing to pay off about 20% of that debt with that one-time money. I'm also proposing that we use cash to build the state veterans home in Hot Springs. You know, we had a little bit of a hiccup when the bids came in considerably above projections. We had to go back to the drawing board, and TSP put their pencil to it and helped us get the cost down below the appropriated amounts. But all along we were going to borrow about $16 million to build that. Now we're not going to. We're going to pay our $16 million in cash. And so it won't help us save payments this year, but it'll help us avoid any debt repayments that would occur in future years. By paying down debt and by avoiding debt, then of course we free up the dollars that we would otherwise be spending on those repayments. Just as if you paid off your mortgage at home or other debt, you don't have to worry about that payment every month or however often you made payment, and you could take that payment and spend it on other things. So by paying down debt and by avoiding debt, we're freeing up ongoing dollars that will recur, in the sense that those expenses don't have to be budgeted for, and instead those dollars that would have paid those payments can support education, can support Medicaid, and so on. So those are the ways that we try to manage our state budget in South Dakota. We estimate our revenue conservatively, and another important thing that we do is we've responsibly managed our public pension plan. Many of you, I'm sure, have read about governments that have been unable to manage their public pension plans. In South Dakota, virtually all government employees are on the one single South Dakota retirement system plan. Sioux Falls municipal employees used to have their own plan, and those that were hired up until just recently are still on that legacy plan, but new employees in Sioux Falls are just like all government employees at every level elsewhere in South Dakota. Whether you're a university professor or secretary or janitor at SDSU or the School of Mines or at any one of our universities, or you're a school teacher in Winter or Mobridge or Del Rapids or wherever, anybody working for a K through 12 school system, or you're a county fireman, or a county road worker, or a city fireman or policeman, all those governments in South Dakota have one plan by which they are served, the South Dakota retirement system. Now I tell you that because last November, the Milliman Public Pension Funding Study evaluated the top 100 pension plans in the nation. And South Dakota is among those top 100 plans in terms of size. We had about, at the time they measured, they were looking at the year ended June 30, 2012. We were about 7.8 billion in assets in our one plan at that time. With a market value of 7.8 billion, we were 93% funded. That means if actuaries looked at our plan, they would say you are 93% of where you need to be certain to make all your commitments to the retirees when they retire or those who are already retired. Now that seems below where we want to be, and it was below where we want to be. But of course, at the end of 2012, we hadn't seen the recovery in the markets that we wanted to see as much as we wanted to see. But this placed us among those 100. We were the third best funded plan. The third best funded plan. So that gives you a sense of where some of the others may be. And some pension plans are grossly underfunded, and I'll just recite the worst. Arizona's plan, 49% funded. The Chicago Municipal Employees Pension at 38% funded. Connecticut State Employees at 37%. Illinois Teachers, 41%. Indiana Teachers, 44%. And the worst, Kentucky Employees Pension Retirement Fund, 29% funded. Some governments create the illusion of a balanced budget by doing the things I talked about earlier. One of the prime recipe or ingredients in that false balanced budget recipe for those governments is to fail to make the payment into their pension plan that the actuaries say they should. They either make no payment into the plan, they declare a little holiday and make no payment into the plan. Imagine you're saving your retirement and your financial planner says, Joe or Mary, you need to set aside X dollars every month. If when you reach 65, you want to have this certain amount that you tell me is your goal, if you want to get to that goal, I can presume a certain earnings rate, but that's not going to get you there if you don't have any principal. So put in a certain amount every month, and maybe you'd adjust that from time to time as earnings rates change. But you've got to be disciplined and put that amount in. Well, some states just skip it, or some states just pay part of it. And that's what you get when you do that sort of thing. They create an illusion of a balanced budget by failing to fund or only partially funding their pension obligation, and ask the city of Detroit how that works in the long run. Last August, now remember, the 93% funded level was as of June 30, 2012. June 30, 2012. Now last August, more than a year later, the South Dakota Investment Council, which manages the South Dakota retirement system money, they reported the earnings of our pension fund for the year ended June 30, just this last June 30 of 2013. The fund earned 19.5%. Congratulations to Matt Clark and the South Dakota Investment Council for an incredible investment year. It's been 25 years since the margin between what their benchmark return should have led them to predict, maybe around 14% is what their, or 12%, what their benchmark should have been. But instead they got 19.5%. It's been 25 years that they've had such a wide margin of success beyond what they should have earned. And Stanford University's Ashby Monk wrote about South Dakota in the Institutional Investor magazine the next month, in September of last year. He said this: what public pension system in the US of A is the best? The chairman of the SDIC says he expects South Dakota's performance will place the South Dakota plan as the single best performing pension fund in the nation. And I bet he's right. So I'm going to go ahead to personally award the SDIC with this year's national championship. And I'm also going to suggest that the SDIC may deserve the title of world champion. That's from Stanford University, reported by Institutional Investor. The retirement system trustees, those who manage the plan, not the money, but the plan, they took those extraordinary earnings and completely extinguished our unfunded liabilities. That 93% funding, we went up over 100% funded now. The next Milliman study will measure us as of June 30, 2013, and will find us over 100% funding, among a very rare few, something to be very proud of. And we should be proud for other reasons too. South Dakota's average personal income growth continues to be among the highest in the nation. In the third quarter of last year, personal income growth compared to the same quarter in 2012 was the highest in the nation. Our per capita income in South Dakota exceeds the national average now. Numbers available for 2012 indicate that the average South Dakotan earns about 3.8% more than the average person in the United States. So because of this spectacular business environment that all these indicators demonstrate, many companies have expanded and added jobs to the South Dakota economy over the past year. And of course, you saw some of that reflected in the bar charts and the line graphs earlier. And much of that is occurring in this region, but it's occurring elsewhere as well. Permian tank and manufacturing and also pipeline plastics both expanded in Belle Fourche to make the most of the boom in the oil and gas fields. And those companies will add 105 jobs to the Belle Fourche area. WL Plastics began production in the new Rapid City facility last August, adding 43 jobs there. AKG North American Operations, a German-based company that provides aluminum air coolers, heat exchangers, they added a new addition to their Mitchell plant that will accommodate 215 jobs. Marmin Energy, of course, is right here in this metro area, a Quebec-based manufacturer of wind towers. They purchased a 150,000 square foot building in Brandon, and they're expanding it to over 200,000 square feet, and they're going to employ up to 250 people this year. In the financial and professional business services sector, of course, you know, in this area, TCF Bank, Capital One, and out in the west, TM1, all have expanded in South Dakota over the past 3 years. And those expansions alone account for 750 jobs that we saw in some of those charts earlier. In the ag sector, Glanbia Nutritionals, which was also mentioned and depicted on the screen here, they're a flaxseed processor. They'll cut the ribbon on their Sioux Falls plant in April. Pulse Processors, a processor of edible beans. They broke ground last October in Harold. And of course, in 2012, Bell Brands announced they would build their new cheese processing facility in Brookings. And construction is on schedule for this 3 football fields long building. Opening later this year, they're going to be processing 500,000 gallons of milk every day. During the recession, of course, the United States lost jobs. South Dakota lost jobs. Only 15 states have recovered all the jobs they lost. South Dakota is one of them. In fact, as you saw in some of the charts, South Dakota now has about 10,000 more jobs than we did at our pre-recession peak. We've added about 2.5% to our job count, while the nation remains about 1% below its job count. And of course, we need employees to fill these jobs. And as Mike pointed out, as I talk with business people here in Sioux Falls and around the state, workforce development is their key concern. Pat Costello and I and some of the other members of my executive committee came to Sioux Falls, met with the Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors, the Development Foundation Board of Directors, and we asked a single question, and we broke out into smaller groups to answer it, and that is, what can the state do to help Sioux Falls continue its economic growth and dynamicism? And the groups came back, and we had some different ideas. One was help Sioux Falls Development Foundation acquire land for development. That was a good idea. Others' ideas were in the realm of taxation. But the one idea that emerged from several groups was help us with workforce, because our employers are having a difficult time growing to the degree they'd like because of the difficulty in finding people to fill the jobs that are open. You know, to better prepare our workforce, a couple of years ago, in my State of the State address, I talked about an initiative we called South Dakota Wins, a workforce initiative, and it had 20 different points, 20 different action steps in 4 categories. We need to help our young people find their way into a path that leads to a job. Many young people in high school and even in the post-secondary years of their early post-secondary careers, they don't know what they want. They don't know where they should go. Or if they do know, they really are uncertain about whether there is a job at the end of their academic career or not. They're following their dreams, but they may not have their eyes open about what's at the end of the academic road. So we are trying to provide students and parents with accurate and current information. So if you're a parent or a grandparent and if you have kids in the school system, particularly those in middle school or high school, I hope they are involved in SD My Life. SD My Life, that's an online portal where parents and students can go to understand where the job demand is, what careers are like, what compensation is like, not to divert anyone from their dreams, but to help them understand what their dreams may be like in reality and how other similar dreams might be a little more likely to lead to a job at the end of the path. And we're trying to also focus attention on expanded career and technical education opportunities in our K-12 schools. Too many people see our technical schools or associate degrees as something for which they must settle, when in fact there are many associate degrees and two-year technical school degrees that offer better compensation and more work responsibility and better opportunity than four-year degrees do, depending upon the particular path. So we want students to look at all their opportunities and all the resources that are available to them in the educational arena. One of the areas we want to give K through 12 students opportunities is to try their hand at some of these technical paths or some of the engineering paths or other paths that may lead to two-year schools or on to four-year schools while they're still in high school. So we've got a great accounting program here that leads to 12 hours of credit at USD. When you go to the Career and Tech Academy here in Sioux Falls, we've got engineering programs here in Sioux Falls, and then some of the more hands-on skilled trades like automotive and welding and machining. Those are found at our technical schools. We also want them to be found at the K-12 schools, but not every school can afford those pieces of equipment. So we're trying to regionalize that in the same way that Sioux Falls has set the example and is a regional center for schools like Del Rapids and Garrettson and Baltic, whose students can come to the Sioux Falls CTE Academy, and then those school districts contribute, but by combining resources from all those school districts, you can get better equipment instead of lesser equipment that's replicated and goes in part unused at some of the outlying districts. We've also expanded the scope of dual credit courses. I mentioned dual credit and the importance of that. We want our students to study some of these areas and have the opportunity to get dual credit if they go on. So while they're in high school, if they take an accounting class or they take a welding class or they take an engineering class, if that provides the curricular, the same kind of curriculum that they would get at SDSU or Southeast Tech or USD, then let's give them credit, college credit. And to the extent that there's been a financial limitation there, the state is, in my budget for this year, contributing to make it very inexpensive for students to take those classes in the high school, but yet also have credit, so they're incented to go on, and students that have that dual credit are shown to finish their post-secondary education at a higher completion rate and more likely on time. So if we can keep those high school students on track, we're much more likely to get them into the workforce as skilled employees that you can hire when they're out there looking for a job. In the past 2 years, we've also made major strides in our efforts to train workers for the skilled jobs that are out there right now. The technical institutes have created distance-based machining and welding programs that combine online and hands-on training. Mitchell Tech has a new welding and manufacturing program. The welding program at Mike Durfee State Prison has been expanded so the inmates can learn that skill and help them prepare for a productive life after their sentence is complete. We awarded $3.8 million in grants to the 4 technical institutes to upgrade their equipment. We created tech school scholarships. The technical institutes are going to receive $500,000 over the next per year over the next 3 years for scholarships in high-need areas, so students can be attracted to the areas where a job will be found at the end. And just last month, I awarded $8.5 million in grants to 12 school districts, serving another 60 surrounding school districts to improve their career tech programs in the way that I just described a minute ago. Rural healthcare is another area, healthcare in general, but rural healthcare in particular is another area where we're addressing workforce needs. 53 of the state's 66 counties are federally designated as health professional shortage areas, either partially and completely, and so we're trying to find ways to build up our healthcare workforce and get them to consider rural areas. The first thing is building up the healthcare workforce. So we increased the class size at the medical school from 52 students to 56 students a couple of years ago, and in my budget this year I'm proposing adding still another 11 students per class. So if adopted, in 5 years' time we'll have 60 more medical students being trained, because we have more who want training than we have space, and so it's a capacity issue, and we're addressing that. We also increased the capacity of the physician assistant program at USD. We were at 20, now we have 25 slots, and we've reserved 20 of those slots for South Dakota students, because we know if South Dakotans go to school here and then start their practice here, odds are that they'll stay here. So we want to try to do the best we can for South Dakotans. And for the first time, we're paying preceptors. If a physician's assistant student graduates, they've got to have a clinical experience under the supervision of a preceptor. In the past, the preceptors got nothing for doing this. And when health professionals are as busy as they are, you'll still find some that are willing to do this, but by giving them some compensation, we're able to expand the number willing to do this. And we're going to expand that preceptorship payment to nurse practitioners in my budget proposal this year. Recruitment is the fourth component of South Dakota Wins, of our Workforce Initiative program, by attracting people to South Dakota, not just training our South Dakotans. We know that's important, but our job growth is outstripping our population growth, and so we need to attract outside folks to those jobs. Moreover, if you've got an opening in your business for a particular skill, you can't wait for Johnny to get through school to fill that job. You need that job filled now. So recruitment has to be an element of our workforce strategy, and we've tried some things that haven't worked, but one thing that has worked is the Dakota Roots program. The Dakota Roots program is not something I started. It started in 2006, but since then, 3,000 people have returned to South Dakota to accept employment as a consequence of the Dakota Roots program. 2 years ago, we made a small marketing investment to, attract attention to the Dakota Roots program again. We did some advertising when people were home for Thanksgiving. We got on television. We got in the media, and we know that if you are a grandparent or a parent whose kids come home for the holidays, you're helping us sell. We know you want them back here, and so we're working together with you, trying to attract those folks back. That marketing investment led to an 89% increase in registrations and a 66% increase in job placements. So we know that's money well spent. We're going to continue to do that. We're also planning workforce summits across the state so businesses and communities can help the state understand where our knowledge has gaps. We collect unemployment information. We collect other kinds of data. We use our job sites, our job unemployment centers to help collect data about what job openings are. But not all employers use the state job service program. And so we know our information is imperfect. So we're going to have a workforce summit later this spring, early summer, here in Sioux Falls. We'll have another one in Rapid, one in Aberdeen, Watertown, Mitchell are some of the communities we're going to do that. And I hope that we'll get folks like you, CEOs, CFOs, human resource officers, the education leaders in the community, help come together and understand what South Dakota can do to help you with your workforce initiative. One thing we have seen in the last 3 years that's been a very positive thing is there's been a spike in net in-migration to South Dakota. I was at the National Governors Association meeting last weekend in Washington, and the governor of Michigan was relieved that the 10-year span over which Michigan lost year after year after year population in terms of people moving out versus moving in to Michigan had finally stabilized, and he was at net zero. He was happy to be at net zero. South Dakota is a net positive, especially in the last several years. We've really had a lot of people moving to South Dakota for jobs. Simple Simon applied for a deputy sheriff's job. Maybe you heard about this. This occurred just recently here in Minnehaha County. In the interview, Sheriff Milstead asked him, "What's 1 and 1?" And Simple Simon said, "It's 11." And Sheriff Milstead, well, he knew that wasn't what he meant, but he had to admit the boy was right. So he asked the next question. Sheriff Milstead said, "What 2 days of the week we begin with T?" And Simple Simon said, "Today and tomorrow." And Sheriff Milstead thought, well, I have to admit he's an impressive out-of-the-box thinker. So he thought, let's try him on something else. He said, "Who killed Abraham Lincoln?" And Simon thought about it and said, "I don't know." And Sheriff Milstead said, "Well, go home and work on that one for a while." And he thought, well, that'll get him out of my hair. And Simple Simon went home, and his mom asked him, "How'd it go?" He said, "It went great. First day on the job, I'm already working on a murder case." So we know you got workforce challenges, and the state is here to try and help you. Congratulations to the Sioux Falls area for your tremendous economy, and thank you for what you do for all of South Dakota with your economic success. Thank you, Mike.
We appreciate Governor Dugard for being here this morning to speak to us. We also appreciate your leadership to our state. Thank you, Governor. I have a couple other thank yous I want to make before I dismiss you. I want to thank the Argus Leader Media. They are live streaming this event, so if you want to catch this event, I'm sure it will be on their website. I want to thank Summer Hoffman, our Director of Research, who's always back up in the booth, and she's done a great job over the years doing all the research for this, so thank you, Summer. And finally, and most importantly, I want to thank all of you, the business community, for what you do in your businesses, in your growth, in your job development, in your philanthropy, and in your leadership. So thank you, and have a great 2014. You're dismissed.